remember that in the previous chapter, we studied this in the last study, the previous chapter, in chapter 15 of 2 Samuel, there was treason committed by Absalom. And that, of course, is David's son. So he, of course, took over the kingdom, or he wanted to take over the kingdom. And so he did, perhaps for just a very short time. And so David, currently here in the chapter, is still on the run. He has to flee. He had to flee because if not, then Absalom would actually kill him. And so he needed to flee, and that's where we are studying here. So in 2 Samuel chapter 16, so we see here, of course, that's what the chapter is about. But here, from verse 1 through verse 4, we see that David, in the chaos there, as he's running, as he's fleeing, he actually is deceived by Ziba. And he begins to slander, Ziba begins to slander Mephibosheth, Saul's son. And remember, we ran across it in our last study. So let's go ahead and read here in 2 Samuel 16, and we'll read from verse 1, and we'll read all the way through verse 4. So 2 Samuel 16, verse 1 through verse 4 says this: When David was a little past to the top of the mountain, there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. Then the king said to Ziba, "What do you mean to do with these?" So Ziba said, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink." Then the king said, "And where is your master's son?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me.'" So the king said to Ziba, "Here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours." And Ziba said, "I humbly bow before you, that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king." So this is very strategic, and it is strategically deceptive on Ziba's part, of course, because he is actually lying to King David. So he takes advantage, he takes opportunity, and, slanders Mephibosheth, Saul's son, who is actually lame. He cannot walk, and he, of course, it would be very understandable if he was just to stay home as he did, but he cannot walk. But in this case with Ziba, takes the opportunity to deceive David, and so that's an unfortunate thing. And so Ziba, of course, he accuses Mephibosheth of wanting to take the kingdom and thinking that the kingdom of Saul, his father, would actually be restored to him, that is, to Mephibosheth. That's not what actually took place. Remember that Mephibosheth was a very humble individual. And so, remember that in 2 Samuel chapter 9, David showed kindness to Mephibosheth, King Saul's son. Remember that he was called, and Mephibosheth most likely thought that he was going to be killed, because that was a common practice back then. With kings, they would actually wipe out, they would kill those that would, be people that might threaten the throne or want to take the throne away from them. And so, and of course, Mephibosheth was Saul's son, so he probably thought that's what King David wants to do. But as soon as he walked in there, as soon as he was taken in there, his slave, of course, he just bows to the ground. And also in his conversation with David, he says, basically considers himself, a dead dog. And so, so he's a humble individual. Now, unfortunately, David believed Ziba's lie regarding Mephibosheth. And so, at this time, of course, David, he is emotional, and he's vulnerable to really anything. And so, in this case, he falls for that. And so, the other thing is, he is exhausted. No doubt, he is perhaps grieving, and perhaps he is under pressure as well because of the situation. he had to flee his kingdom. His own son committed treason, and so he is very vulnerable there. And so unfortunately, he does believe. He transfers all of Mephibosheth's inheritance to Ziba. And of course, David acts here without really inquiring, without verifying to see if Ziba's story actually is true or if it's not true. And so that's what he does. Unfortunately, he falls for the lie. And so, but in 2 Samuel 19, of course, then Mephibosheth will reveal Ziba's deception. And so we'll be going through that. So David, here from verse 5 through verse 14, David is cursed by Shimei of the house of Saul. So let's go ahead and read that in verse 5 through verse 14. It says, "Now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei the son of Gera, coming from there. He came out cursing continuously as he came, and he threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. Also Shimei said thus when he cursed, 'Come out, you bloodthirsty man,' he wrote. 'The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man.' Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, 'Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head.' But the king said, 'What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, Curse David. Who then shall say, Why have you done so?' And David said to Abishai, all his servants, 'See how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and what the Lord will repay, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day.' And as David and his men went along the road, Shimei went along the hillside opposite him, and cursed as he went, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Now the king and all the people who were with him became weary, so they refreshed themselves there." So you notice this public cursing of David from this individual, Shimei. And so he is a Benjamite. Of course, he is a relative of Saul. And, he's attacking David in this case. There's verbal abuse. He's throwing stones. And then he is also accusing David of blood guilt. In other words, basically just calling David, saying that he's the one that killed Saul. But of course, that's a false accusation there. That is inaccurate, and of course we've gone through those scriptures there. And then of course you have some of the men of David just wanting to take off this individual's head there in verse 9. And now that would actually that would have been something that other people would do, but David was a God-fearing man, very imperfect in every way. Of course, we saw that in our last study, but in this case here, it seems that David, he's doing that which was right, because I'm sure any other individual would have said, "Yeah, go take off his head right now, teach him a lesson for what he's done." But David, of course, is not doing that. And so there's a theological restraint there on the part of David. He says, "The Lord has said unto him, Curse David," there in verse 10 through 12. So he is submitting, of course, to that, as that is coming from the Lord in that. And then that humiliation continues, verse 13 and 14. And David is not going to retaliate. This individual, of course, will go ahead and have his day. And so he is going to, basically get judged for being such a disobedient individual. So we'll be going through that soon enough. So then from verse 15 through verse 23, you see that Absalom enters Jerusalem, and Ahithophel's advised there is mentioned. So now Absalom, he enters, and of course there are many people that are receiving him. And remember that even Israel, and it appears that most of Israel is actually with him. Remember that Absalom actually won the hearts of the people when they were coming down, and so he would basically, hug them and kiss them and pretend that he really cared for them, but of course he had motives behind that. And so he enters Jerusalem, he's greatly received. But from verse 16 through 19, of course, Hushai, there's Hushai's risky encounter there. So let's read that. And so it was when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" So Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Furthermore, whom shall I serve? Shall I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in your father's presence, so will I be in your presence." So you have Hushai there, of course, he is David's friend. But remember that he was actually sent by David back into the city because he would actually be more helpful for David. He would be more helpful for David, for Hushai to actually go back and, thwart the counsel of the other individuals there. So that is back in 2 Samuel 15. You can see that verse 32 through 34. But remember, we've actually gone through that in our last study. So he is going to undermine Ahithophel's counsel, and we'll see that he does. And he acts as David's loyal friend. And then, of course, there from verse 20 to 23, you have Ahithophel's counsel, and basically, to just show that Absalom is actually now king there in Jerusalem and of Israel. And so his counsel is there, to usurp the throne. And basically, Absalom, he counsels Absalom to go ahead and sleep with his father's concubines and publicly. And so, of course, that would declare a permanent just division, a rupture from, with David. And then, of course, that would also secure the rebels, those that hate David, that would secure them to Absalom, David's son. That is the new king, as he's believing that will happen. But that is actually also a fulfillment of prophecy. Remember that Nathan's prophecy back in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 11 and 12. Remember that Nathan told David there, verse 11, "Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this son. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before this son." So notice that is actually a fulfillment of what the Lord said. So now Absalom, of course, to further humiliate publicly his father, King David, and to win the hearts of the people, the rebels. Basically, he does this horrific thing, goes into his father's concubines, and he does it out on the rooftop, out in the open, under the sun. And so, which of course is the same rooftop, that's the same location where David's sin took place with Bathsheba. Remember that. So in 2 Samuel chapter 17, from verse 1 through verse 4, we have Ahithophel's strategic counsel to Absalom. And so there, let's go ahead and read in 2 Samuel 17, and it goes from verse 1 through verse 4. It says, "Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, Now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee. And I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. So this is a military strike is proposed here, and we see that from verse 1 through verse 2. And of course, the goal is, as he stated, to strike David while he is weary and he is very discouraged. Which, through a military point of view, I think that would actually have been an ideal attack. And so because David is on the run, unfortunately, but Ahithophel, unfortunately, does not, well, unfortunately for him, his counsel is not followed. So it is strategically sound and politically efficient, but then you have the counter counsel in verse 5 through 13. Let's read all the way to verse 14. It says, Then Absalom said, Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he says too. And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. So Hushai said to Absalom, The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are encouraged in their minds. Enraged in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of war, and will not camp with the people. Surely by now he is hid in some pit or in some other place. And it will be when some of them are overthrown at the first, that whoever hears it will say, This is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore, I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea for a multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all the men who are with him, there shall be not left so much as one. Moreover, he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will pull it into the river until there is not one small stone found there. So Absalom and all the men of Israel said, The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. For the Lord has purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom. So notice that, Absalom, of course, requests that second opinion, that second advice. And so if you think it's very strategic, speak on. If not, let me know. Of course, paraphrasing there. And so he does. But as there, the last verse does say, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. And then it says, For the Lord has purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster in Absalom. So, of course, the previous advice was very sound. It was very strategic, but Absalom, heard, of course, David's friend's advice instead of the other one. This was of the Lord. And so, notice there, as we've read in verse 8 through 10, Hushai emphasizes David's reputation. He is a man that is seasoned in war, and he is actually very dangerous right now. He's like a cub that is robbed of her bears, something that you don't want to mess with. So that is, of course, the psychological portrait of David that is given. And so Hushai, of course, proposes a grand military campaign with all Israel. And what he is actually doing here, he's actually appealing to the flesh. He's actually appealing to, to pride. So perhaps Absalom begins to imagine himself, in front of all these soldiers, and going to battle and to war, and in glory and honor, and against his enemy, his own father, the king. And so, he falls for that. But of course, that's for his destruction when he does go to war. And so there, as we see from verse 15 to verse 22, you do have Hushai that warns David, to flee, to escape. So there is communication through the priesthood, verse 15 through 16. Hushai informs Zadok and Abiathar. And then, of course, Jonathan and Ahimaaz are the messengers there in verse 17 through 20. They're secretly, of course, doing this. The young men wait secretly or discreetly outside the city. A servant girl relays information. A lad, unfortunately, sees them. He tells Absalom, and then, of course, Absalom's men pursue them. They hide in a well at Bahurim, and a woman conceals them with grain, spreading it, over them, so they won't be found. That, of course, once again, you can study there from verse 17 through verse 15 through verse 22. And so the message, of course, does get to David there in verse 21 and 22. He immediately mobilizes his people, and then he crosses the Jordan before dawn. And now in verse 23 it says, "Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb." So, he felt, no doubt, he felt very humiliated, very ashamed in the presence of all Israel because his advice was not followed, and did not like it. Put his house in order. Guess whatever he had to do, leave the inheritance to his sons, and anything else that he had to do, and he killed himself, and so he hanged himself. Now, verse 24 through 29, you have David's provision. They're given to him there in Mahanaim. And so David does establish a temporary base there. You also see that Absalom crosses the Jordan with Israel. And you also see that Amasa is appointed commander in place of Joab there in verses 25 through 26. And then you have the loyal supporters of David's providing supplies there, 27 through 29. So they bring, of course, they bring beds, they bring food, they bring grain, they bring honey. They also bring livestock. So then in chapter 18, you have in chapter 18, David begins to organize his forces there from verse 1 to verse 4. And so he appoints commanders over thousands and hundreds. And David, of course, desires to go into battle in verse 3, but the people refuse to let him go. So David is worth 10,000 to them. So they don't let David go. And which, of course, was a very, I would say, a very good decision of the people not to let David go, because then, all Israel would try to focus just on David. They would try to just strategically just, go towards where David is actually at. And so, divide the line somehow and get to David. And so they're not going to let him go, and he doesn't go. He remains in this city, as you can see in verse 4. And then David's command concerning Absalom is there in verse 5 through 7. So he says, "Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, 'Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom.' And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured." So you have this conflict taking place between David's men and then Absalom's men. So, battle between the father and the son in this case. The father being David, but he's not there, but it's still that battle. And so this tension, of course, does dominate the entire chapter, and so all the people hear David's words. that take it very easy, deal very gently with Absalom, which, you know, according to the way David's men, David's soldiers and his commanders are actually seeing this, it's like, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. So this could actually go against David. He could actually end up losing the kingdom even for this decision. Of course, you know, that's through a human perspective, not through the eternal perspective, because we know, of course, that God, you know, has established David as king, right? So, but this is a dangerous, you know, command that he actually gave to his men. Take it easy for Absalom. I mean, come on. You know, his own son, Absalom, took the kingdom and is hunting him and wants to kill him. Well, we understand, of course, that perspective through a father, right? I mean, that would be very difficult. Through a military point of view, that, of course, should not be done. But David there is, you know, he's the king and he is the father as well. So he has a very difficult time. And obviously, he loves Absalom. He still loves Absalom. He's you know, missing his son. So take it easy with Absalom. Well, then you have the death of Absalom there from verse 9 through 18. Let's read that. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on the mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth. And the mule which was under him went on. Now a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I just saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. So Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? And why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart, while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom, and struck and killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods, and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. So you have Absalom's predicament there. You know, he's fighting. Where the men are at, who knows? You know, his men. It is not stated, but it appears that he is going through the thick bushes there in the terebinth tree and did not duck enough, and he got caught. And so now he is hanging, and he is in a very compromising position. And so one thing, of course, that it's very, you know, it's there's irony here, because remember that back in chapter 14 in verse 25 through 26, remember that it states that Absalom had long hair, and when he would cut it, it would be about somewhere 5 pounds, you know. And he prided himself in his hair. And so, unfortunately, what he prided himself in actually ends up being the cause of his own death. So, in this case, you know, his hair. And so it is reported to Joab, of course, that, you know, this young soldier, that he saw Absalom hanging on there in the terebinth tree, and why did you not kill him? Well, I think it was very smart for that soldier, you know, not to kill Absalom, because he would have actually placed himself in a very dangerous position, because remember David, remember that those that killed Saul's son when Saul died and they made him king. And remember also when that, I believe it was Ethiopian, if I'm not mistaken, when Saul actually fell on his own spear. He went to David with a lie, and I steered him through because he told me to tell him, so I did. And remember what David did to them. David killed him, right? He had them killed. So this individual most likely was thinking about that, and I think it was very wise for him not to kill Absalom himself. So he told Joab here, and I think it would have been the case where Joab probably would have been commanded by David, kill him, and so, but he refused, and so Joab goes and kills him, and then 10 armor bearers go and they kill Absalom as well. So they bury him there. And then from verse 19 through verse 22, you have the messengers and the news. Ahimaaz desires to run there, verse 19 through 23. He is the son of Zadok the priest. He is actually eager, but he is very uninformed. He has no news. So why is he running? Why does he want to run? He's there, asking Joab, and here, let me run too, let me run too. Why do you want to run? You have no news to give. Oh, but I still want to run. I still want to run. And unfortunately, I think that in his case, he ends up looking foolish because he's running, but why is he running? He's got no news to give the king. He's very uninformed. And but Joab, finally ends up letting him go because he keeps pestering. You remember, just like those kids, please, can I have, when your kids were small, please, can I have one? Can I have one, please? Can I have a cookie? And, okay, here you go. You finally give in, and you give your children a cookie, right? So I think that was the case here. So he is uninformed. And then so there's the Cushite messenger. He is seen running by the watchman, verse 24 through 27. Ahimaaz arrives there in verse 28 through 30, but he does not have a complete report. It's like, what news do you have? Well, everything's going fine. Paraphrasing. That's it. And so, why is he running? I think there's a purpose. I mean, if you're going to run, you need to run with a purpose. You need to run having an established purpose in mind, not run in vanity. And I think, unfortunately, many people, they are running in vain. They're running without really a report. They're running without having really any news, any substance in their life. And so I think that's the case here. It's a good representation of what a lot of people actually are doing today. There's really no substance in their life. You're not talking about Christians. Of course, you see this also with non-believers, but with Christians, there's really no substance in their life as far as their goals in life. They really have no news. They don't share the gospel and anything else, and so. But you have the Cushites report there in verse 31 through verse 32. And so the Cushite report, that's actually a good title for a newscast or something, right? Or a program there. So the Cushite report with Pastor Greg, hey, well, you already have a pulpit review, so I'll give that to any of you guys that want it. So then there, of course, he gives David the news in verse 33. Then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if I had died in your place, oh Absalom, my son, my son." I mean, he just lost his son. I mean, why should we, blame David here? I mean, come on, David, he was your enemy. He tried to take the kingdom away from you. Okay, that could be said of someone else. Yes, off with their head. But not of your own son. I mean, but of course he was caught in a very difficult position. He wasn't he? So he's weeping, he's crying for his son. I mean, it's his son, So then in there in 2 Samuel 19 and verse 1 through 8, you see that he is very grieved, and that actually puts a crisis on his leadership there. So let's read verse 1 through 8. It says, "And Joab was told, Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard it said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." So notice what is happening here. The people now, they're like, what in the world is going on here? I mean, you rejoice when you win the battle. You rejoice when your enemies are killed. I mean, that's the normal reaction, right? And so, but they're going away like in shame, like if they lost the battle. But notice verse 5, "Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night, and that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your mouth until now." Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told all the people, saying, "There is the king sitting in the gate." So all the people came before the king, for everyone of Israel had fled to his tent. So, yes, David is grieving very bitterly. He has a good reason to, but perhaps not in front of the people. Perhaps not in front of the military officers and, the soldiers, because that actually became shame to them, And so, now, Joab, of course, he is basically putting his own life at risk here, verse 5 through 7, as he does that, as he goes to the king. But he does see what is happening. I mean, remember, Joab has been with David from the beginning. And Joab was a very strategically sound, military sound person. So, I mean, he knew how to fight. He knew the battles, and he also knew his men. He knew the men of David that he commanded. And so he knew, I need to go and talk to the king, because if not, this is what's going to happen. And he's probably seeing the reaction of the soldiers. He's probably seeing that they now feel so ashamed, and perhaps they're about to take off and turn on David. And so by doing this, he is risking his life, but I think it was very, very smart of him to do that. And so David, of course, resumes his royal duty, sits there at the gate, and people come. So then you do read, of course, the national division I mentioned on following Absalom's death there, and so then Israel is also scattered and confused, and the people flee to their homes. And verse 9 through 10, there is now public debate among the tribes. And so they begin to debate among themselves. And they remember, of course, that David did deliver them from their enemies. Remember when he was king? And so, but some are still hesitating, of course. And they end up mourning Absalom, of course. And so, and then from verse 11 through 15, you have David's appeal to Judah, and how to Judah's restoration and kingship. So David speaks, of course, through Zadok and Abiathar, as the verses say, and they challenge Judah and say, "Why are you the last to bring the king back?" And so remember that Judah had led Absalom's rebellion. So why haven't they brought the king back? And so that's the question. And so the rebellion, the restoration must begin where the rebellion was the strongest, and of course, that obviously does take place. So in verse 13, we do read that, and say to Amasa, and this was very, very wise of David, and say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if you are not commander of the army before me continually in my place, in place of Joab. So that was very, very wise of David to do, because remember, Amasa was, a commander of the opposite army, those that were hunting David. So in this case, David is, appealing, of course, to they are part of the same, people, and so you are bone of my bones, and so you are my bone and my flesh. In other words, we're related. So in this case, once again, that was very smart, and so Judah does restore the king in verse 14 through 15. And then you have individual encounters during the king's return there, verse 16 through 30. So you have, remember Shimei, his plea for mercy there mentioned in verse 16 through 23. Remember, he is the one that began to curse David, not knowing that it would come back upon him. So he probably thought that, yes, Absalom is now king, David is out, there's no way that this will come back upon me, and so he opens his mouth and his tongue begins to run loose. But now he's in shame. So he comes in fear. And so he makes a public confession of guilt. Abishai, of course, demands execution, rightly so. But David, he does not end up killing him. He does not take vengeance. He declares that day a day of restoration and not retribution. So notice now in verse 24 through 30, notice now that it says, now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So it was when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king that King David said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes, for all that my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore what right have I still to cry out any more to the king? So the king said to him, why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Ziba divide the land. Then Mephibosheth said to the king, brother, let him take it all, and as much as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house. Notice that. So Mephibosheth here appears, of course, all, unshaven, all raggedy, because the verses don't say how many days or weeks David was out, but perhaps it was just a short time, and so but Mephibosheth was or had been faithful to David, but Ziba unfortunately had slandered him. So David, in this case, his judgment is not a perfect judgment per se here, because Ziba was lying, right? And so he slandered Mephibosheth, and so full investigation should have been done, but then, right, in this case here with Ziba, he got away, you could say. He got half of Saul's possessions, but then Mephibosheth just let him keep everything. So now notice that David, of course, was kind there to Mephibosheth, David's kindness to Barzillai there, verse 31 through 39. Remember, he is the elderly man who sustained David while he was in exile, and David wants to repay him back, but he's already an old man, and he just wants to stay home and just, I guess, take it easy, have an easy life in retirement. And so he does not want to receive the gifts, so they give the blessings to someone else instead, Chimham. And then in verse 40 to 43, you have the quarrel about the king. So Israel accuses Judah of stealing the king. And so Judah, of course, appeals to his kingship, and Israel appeals to numerical superiority. It's like, we're many of us. There's 10 tribes of us, and you're only one. So they're fighting over the king. And then in chapter 20, you have Sheba's rebellion and the restoration of Davidic authority. There's a new rebel in town, and of course his name is Sheba. And there in verse 1 and 2, he says, we have no portion in David, every man to his tent, O Israel. So he is rejecting the Davidic kingship. And so by saying that we have no portion in David, he is challenging, of course, the established monarchy. And so there are men of Israel that follow Sheba, but there are other men, and the men of Judah, they remain loyal to David. And so also in verse 3, as you read there, David does restore his concubines that were violated by Absalom, his son. He provides for them, but he does confine them permanently to widowhood. And so he no longer, has intimacy with them. And so King David, of course, commands Amasa to suppress the rebellion in verse 4 through 7. So he is tasked, to get ready within 3 days. But in verse 5, you read that he takes longer to do that. And so he does demonstrate incompetence and a weak leadership, because he takes longer. He's not ready. And so David, of course, fears that Sheba is becoming more dangerous, more stronger than Absalom. So he's got to do something. So he orders Abishai to pursue Sheba, and then Joab's forces accompany them. And then, of course, in verse 8 through 13, you see the murder of Amasa by Joab. And so they encounter there at Gibeon, verse 8. He meets Amasa, and he does appear, that is Joab. Remember, he's a mighty man, military strength, individual. So he comes to Amasa. They are on the same side, right? But he comes to Amasa, very friendly, but he's got other plans. And so he kills him, verse 9 and 10. And so stabs him in the abdomen, and so Amasa dies without resistance there. Now, why did Joab end up killing Amasa here? So there could be personal motives behind that murder, perhaps personal ambition. Remember that Amasa was now placed as one of the leading commanders by David. It could be that, I get rid of him and he's not going to be a leading commander anymore. And so also perhaps prior animosity. Remember that Joab was the same one that actually ended up killing Abner back in 2 Samuel chapter 3. Or it could also be that in this case, Joab, so far, he was still very faithful to David, or that's how it appears. It could be that he realized that, Amasa did not get ready within 3 days, and that put King David's life in danger. That could be the reason that he ended up killing him as well. now in verse 14 through 22, you have the siege of Abel Beth Maacah there. So Sheba travels north to Abel Beth Maacah. And then, of course, you have Joab's siege there in verse 15 through 16. He surrounds the city because the enemy is there. Sheba is there. And then he begins to use a battering ram. And that ram is constructed, and he wants to take the city. But there is a wise woman there in the city. Realizes that she needs to do something, because if not, the city is going to be destroyed and perhaps other people killed. Verse 16 through 22 says, Then a wise woman cried out from the city, Here, please say to Joab, Come nearby, that I may speak with you. When he had come near to her, the woman said, Are you Joab? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, Hear the words of your maidservant. And he answered, I am listening. So she spoke, saying, They used to talk in former times, saying, They shall surely seek guidance at Abel, and so they would end disputes. I am among the peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Joab answered and said, Far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not so. But a man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba the son of Bichri by name, has raised his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. So the woman said to Joab, Watch, his head will be thrown at you over the wall. Then the woman in her wisdom went to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba the son of Bichri and threw it out to Joab. Then he blew a trumpet, and they withdrew from the city, every man to his tent. So Joab returned to the king at Israel. So notice that very wise woman realized that the city would most likely be destroyed, but she, good wisdom. Wisdom right there from the woman, and so godly wisdom is what I'm trying to say. And so they grab, of course, the enemy and cut his head off, and that ends that. Then, of course, verse 23 to 26 just speaks of David's officers. So, then in 2 Samuel 21, you have national famine due to Saul's blood guilt there in verse 1. The famine is lasting 3 consecutive years, and David inquires of the Lord. And so the famine is attributed to Saul's violation of an oath that Joshua had made with the Gibeonites back in Joshua chapter 9. When they entered the promised land, remember that these individuals, they pretended to be from a very far away land, and look, our clothing is so ragged out, our shoes are worn out, and look at our bread is very stale. And so, but we've heard of your God, and we want to make a treaty with you. And so Joshua, of course, they don't ask counsel of the Lord, they just make a treaty, and so now they have to keep it. So that is what's going on. So Saul actually just wanted to annihilate them and destroy them. So breaking that oath. And so that's why the famine was going on there. And so David, of course, goes to them, and David asks, What shall I do? There in, once again, in chapter 21, verse 6. They don't ask for any monetary compensation, and they do request execution of 7 male descendants of Saul. And why is that happening? Why are they asking for 7? Why are they asking for bloodshed in this case? 7 male descendants. Remember that Mephibosheth is one of them. But in this case, he is safe. David will not pick him. And that is actually happening because, once again, the pact that was made was violated by Saul. And so he shed innocent blood. And so based on Numbers 35, verse 33, blood guilt does defile the land. And let me read that to you. It says, So you shall not pollute the land where you are, for blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it. except by the blood of him who shed it. So Saul is dead, and so now his sons, or those that are left, need to pay that price. And so you remember, Mephibosheth is not going to get killed. David is protecting him. He is Saul's son. Verse 7 through 9 there in chapter 21 says, "But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the two sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Mahalathite. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hung them on the hill before the Lord. So they fell all 7 together and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley." So that Mephibosheth, that second one that is mentioned, obviously that's a different one. Okay. So then you have from verse 10 through verse 14, Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, or Aiah, however you pronounce it, the concubine of Saul's. She does a vigil, and then you also see David's response there from verse 10 to verse 14. She does guard the bodies for 4 months, protects them from the birds and the beasts. And so David, of course, he shows compassion. He retrieves also Saul's bones and Jonathan's bones, and he provides for them an honorable burial. And so, and after the burial, God responded to the plea for the land. Then the famine ends. Then from verse 15 through verse 22, you have the battle with the Philistine giants. So you have, David grows actually very weary. Then you have the descendants of the giants mentioned. Rapha, he nearly kills David. Abishai saves David's life, and then David is restricted, of course, from further front lines combat. And then you have additional giant slaying victories there, verse 18 through 22. Then in 2 Samuel 22, verse 1 through 2, it says, "Then David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And he said," so he begins with this song. So it speaks of God being the covenant deliverer there in verse 2 to 4. David uses 7 images like rock, fortress, deliverer, shield, horn of salvation, stronghold, and refuge, which of course all speak of the Lord there. And then verse 5 through 7 speaks of David's distress and near-death experiences. He speaks of waves of death, floods of ungodly men, snares of Sheol. And of course, these expressions actually indicate imminent death, overwhelming opposition, and spiritual and physical danger. Then verses 8 through 16, you have the what is called a theophanic intervention of Yahweh. So the descriptions there speak of earth shaking, heavens bowed, fire from God, thunder and lightning, and waters exposed. And so also God is portrayed as righteously angry at injustice. And so then from verse 17 through 20, you have the personal deliverance and divine rescue. And so God as the active rescuer, it's spoken of like that, and he sent from above. Also says, he drew me out of many waters, he brought me forth into a large place. Then verses 21 through 25, you have divine reward according to covenant faithfulness mentioned. David declares, "The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness." Now, this is not implying sinless perfection, because remember, David was not perfect. That's not what David is saying, according to my own righteousness. I'm holy and righteous. That's not what he is saying. The meaning of righteousness within the Old Testament theology, speaking of covenant loyalty, talking about faithful obedience, and then also the repentant heart. As you go through the Psalms, you will run across a lot of this, as we go through the Psalms. And then verses 26 through 28, it says, with the merciful you will show yourself merciful. With a blameless man you will show yourself blameless. With the pure you will show yourself pure. And with the devious you will show yourself shrewd. You will save the humble people, but your eyes are on the haughty, that you may bring them down. So this, speaks of God's moral governing principle. And so God is consistent in that. So, of course, he's holy and righteous in everything he does. So, verses 29 through 37 speaks of God as the source of victory and power. You have the phrases like that, God enables the king, God lights the lamp, God strengthens the warrior, God makes the way perfect. In verses 38 through 43, there's triumph over enemies. So, enemies are crushed. Opposition eliminated, and then there is no escape possible. And then, of course, verses 44 through 46, you have the verses that speaking of the foreign people submitting and nations serving David. And then in verses 47 through 51, you have the final doxology and covenant praise. It says, the Lord lives, blessed be my rock, let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. It is God who avenges me and subdues the peoples under me. He delivers me from the enemies. You also lift me up above those who rise against me. You have delivered me from the violent man. Therefore I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles, and sing praises to your name. He is the tower of salvation to his king, and shows mercy to his anointed, to David and his descendants forevermore. So notice there in verse 51, once again, David says, and shows mercy to his anointed, to David and his descendants forevermore. Forever, olam, in Hebrew, and so that's literal. It is forever. This cannot be spiritualized. This speaks of God being faithful to the covenant that he made, to the Davidic covenant that he made. And so this guarantees, of course, a future Davidic reign which will be fulfilled in Christ. God is not done with his people. He has not cast his people to the side. The church does not inherit the promises of Israel. These are two distinct. The Israel and the church are very distinct. So God still has plans for Israel. The church, of course, it's the body of Christ, and so we're studying Revelation, and God still has plans for Israel. And so, then 2 Samuel 23, you have David's last words there, a prophetic oracle, verse 1 through 7 says, now these are the last words of David. Thus is David the son of Jesse. Thus is the man raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and his word was on my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spoke to me. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he shall be like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, like the tender grass springing out of the earth, by clear shining after rain. Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secured. For this is all my salvation and all my desire. Will he not make it increase? But the sons of the rebellion shall all be as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man who touches them must be armed with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they shall be utterly burned with fire in their place. So David, as noticed here, in verse 1, he is actually identified by four titles as the son of Jesse, being one. Then the man raised up on high, two, the anointed of God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel. And so you have David's divine, inspirational words that is, these words came from God. So, and then of course you have in verse 5 once again the Davidic covenant being reaffirmed. It's unconditional, it's literal, it is future oriented, and as mentioned, it is not transferable to the church. This will take place in the literal millennial kingdom, the literal 1,000 years that will take place after the tribulation period. Then, from verses 8 through verses 39, you have the mighty men of David that are mentioned. You have Josheb-Bashebeth in verse 8, Eleazar son of Dodo, verse 9 through 10, and of course, in between those verses, you see what they did, and so forth, their mighty acts. You have Shema son of Ahi, verses 11 to 12. Then David saw longing for water from Bethlehem. There, verses 13 through 17. You have the act of the three mighty men who risked their lives to fulfill David's wish. He desired to drink water from Bethlehem when he was running away from King Saul. And so three men heard it. They went into Bethlehem. They grabbed water and took it to David. But of course, David, he refused to drink it, because it would be like he would be drinking the blood of these men, so he poured it out to the Lord. So, then, of course, in verses 18 through 23, Abishai and Benaiah, they are mentioned there. So, Abishai, verses 18 through 19, he's the brother of Joab. He killed 300 men. And then Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, verses 20 to 23, he was known for his extraordinary feats, killed 2 Moabite champions, slayed a lion in a pit on a snowy day, and defeated an Egyptian warrior with his own spear. So these were mighty men. These were not wimps. These were not, cowardly. These were strong, mighty men. Those that would roar, "Rah, rah, rah, I'm a man," They would go and show that in battle. So, not like some of the men you see today, unfortunately, right? So, you have the 30 mighty men listed there, verses 24 through 39. And at the end, you notice in verse 39 who is listed. Uriah, the Hittite, is listed. So, why was he listed last? Well, we don't know.
Show me first.
Yeah. Most likely not in this case.
No.
I think because of the sin, David's sin. So that could be a possibility. I'm not saying that is it, but he is listed last. So, chapter 24. Then you have David's census of Israel and Judah. Chapter 24, verse 1 to 4 says, "Again the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, 'Go number Israel and Judah.' So the king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, 'Now go throughout all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and count the people, that I may know the number of the people.' And Joab said to the king, 'Now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times more than there are. And may the eyes of my lord the king see it. But what does my lord the king desire this thing?'" Or why does my lord the king desire this thing? Verse 4, "Nevertheless the king's words prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the army. Therefore Joab and the captains of the army went out from the presence of the king to count the people of Israel." So we see here in verse 1 that it does state that the anger of the Lord was against Israel. And this could actually be referring to that there's some unspecified national sin that we're not being told of here, but for a reason, God, of course, bring this judgment against them. So the anger of the Lord was against them. And of course, this is a corporate judgment. It is not merely personal. It is not one or two individuals. This is, the entire nation. Then God uses, of course, David as the instrument here through which discipline comes. That's what we see in the chapter here. And then also, God permits the testing, but David does bear the responsibility as well. And so, there is a parallel passage, 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1. We'll be getting to those books soon enough. And so it says, now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. So you see there that Satan is the immediate instigator, but of course God is the ultimate sovereign authority here. And so God in his sovereignty allows that. Satan does the tempting, and then man chooses, right? So David, of course, commands them to take the census, and the census was not sinful per se. So counting, there are censuses that are taking place and have taken place throughout history. But the censuses themselves, they're not the sinful act. In this case, the sin most likely lay, of course, in pride, in self-reliance, in military confidence. And it could possibly be that David sought security in these things. Go number Israel to see how many we have and how powerful we are. But wait a minute. The Lord is the one that will deliver you. So, and of course, Exodus 30, verse 11 through 16, does require atonement for the census. And failure, of course, there would be failure to do so would be sin against the Lord. So verses 5 through 9, the execution of the census takes place. There's 9 months and 20 days, then the result of that is there. Verses 5 through 9, there's 800,000 valiant men, 500 in Judah. That's in Israel. In Judah, 500,000. And then verses 10 through 17, let's read that. You have the judgment of David's sin. And David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done, but now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. Now when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, go and tell David, thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. So God came to David and told him, and he said to him, shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land? Or shall you flee 3 months before your enemies while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days plague in your land? Now consider and see what answer I shall take back to him who sent me. And David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great. But do not let me fall into the hand of man. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel from the morning till the appointed time. From Dan to Beersheba, 70,000 men of the people died. And when the angel stretched out his hand over Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the destruction, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, it is enough. Now restrain your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking the people, and said, surely I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be against me and against my father's house. So you see here in verse 10 that David's heart condemned him. He felt so guilty for what he did. He realized that he sinned against the Lord. And so there are the elements of true repentance here, of course. He acknowledges his sin. He does accept his guilt. And then he appeals to God's mercy. And, the Lord did ask him to choose three. There, verse 11 through 13, 7 years of famine, or 3 months fleeing before enemies, or 3 days of pestilence. But I think David was very right. I think that this was the best decision, one of the best decisions in this case. In verse 14, let us not fall into the hand of the Lord. So David, of course, has realized that the Lord is so gracious and so loving and so merciful. But the plague still needs to take place. Judgment still needs to happen. And so you see there in verse 15 through 17 that 70,000 men died. And it does demonstrate a seriousness of sin before a holy God. And so you have the angel stretching his hand towards Jerusalem, but God does intervene. And then verse 18 through 25 it says, and this is the altar on the threshing floor. And God came that day to David and said to him, go up, erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David, according to the word of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded. Now Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming towards him. So Araunah went out and bowed before the king with his face to the ground. Then Araunah said, why has my lord the king come to his servants? And David said, to buy the threshing floor from you, to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be withdrawn from the people. Now Araunah said to David, let my lord the king take and offer up whatever seems good to him. Look, here are oxen for burnt sacrifice and threshing implements, and the yokes of the oxen for wood. All these, O king, Araunah has given to the king. And Araunah said to the king, may the Lord your God accept you. Then the king said to Araunah, no, but I will surely buy it from you for a price. Nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which costs me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord heeded the prayer for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel. So notice that it's very interesting that this sacrifice needs to take place in this location. So the altar, of course, needs to be built there on the threshing floor of Araunah. And this location is very significant, and both geographically and theologically. And so, because the site actually becomes Mount Moriah. This is the future. This is where the future temple would stand, through the historic perspective. And of course, we'll see that that's where they actually end up building it. And so that's where Solomon's temple stands. But the other thing also, this is where Abraham actually offered Isaac, or was about to offer Isaac, in Genesis 22. So it's very interesting that this sacrifice is to take place there. But also, it is also very interesting that David does not want to accept it. He does not want to worship the Lord, or do a sacrifice to the Lord with that which costs him nothing. Perhaps other individuals would say, oh, yeah, right, I'm not going to spend any money on it, right? And because it costs me nothing, so, hey, I got my sacrifice already. But no. David realizes that this is a sacrifice that he needs to do. And I think that in a way he would be cheating himself had he received that offering without paying anything for it. And I think that that had he done that, it would have not been pleasing to the Lord. So David actually realizes that he needs to spend, and buy that with his own money. So, so you have the offering there, of course, in verse 24. It is burnt offerings, that's for atonement, and then you have the peace offerings for restored fellowship. And then the plague is stopped and the fellowship is restored there. So, open your Bibles to 2 Samuel 25. There is no 2 Samuel 25.
Please try again.
I'm not talking to you, sir. We will be studying next, of course, 1 Kings, and we'll see how far we get. Perhaps we might do 1 Kings in two settings, and only the Lord knows. Amen. Let's pray. Thank you, our Father, for tonight's study and for allowing us to go through these chapters, Lord, and to see these wonderful stories, Lord, and historical events, which are part of your word as well. And so we see, Father, these things that David was in, Lord, and how his enemies were against him. But we also see, Father, that you did protect David, Father, and nobody would be taking him off the throne, because that is a promise that you will keep. And Lord, we do know that is future. His son Jesus will sit on his father's throne, King David's throne, in the millennial reign. And so we believe that. Thank you once again, our Father, for allowing us to gather together as a body of believers and to study the Word. And so draw us closer to you. And I pray, Father, that these studies are very edifying, spiritually edifying, Father, to the church, to those that are listening online, Father, or those that will watch this study. Pray, Father, that they would continue to grow and desire the Word. And so now, Lord, bless us as we go home. Be with us, Father. May we arrive safely. And we thank you, Lord, once again for your grace and your